This presentation is part 2 of 2. Part 1 had ended with the skilled activity story of Wheelwright Slab, who told Duke Huan that he was reading the mere leftovers of the ancients. We pick up from there. Consider this story in combination with this passage from chapter 26 in our RCCP text entitled Outside Things. A trap is for fish. When you've got the fish, you can forget the trap. A snare is for rabbits. When you've got the rabbit, you can forget the snare. Words are for meaning. When you've got the meaning, you can forget the words. Where can I find someone who's forgotten words so I can have a word with him? Words are for Zhuangzi externals, and so are of men rather than of heaven or of nature. Words can give us a relative understanding of where we want to go. The wheelwright can say to his son, "Hit the chisel hard this time," or someone can tell a person learning to drive a standard transmission, "Let the clutch out slowly with your left foot while you lightly push the accelerator pedal with your right foot." The wheelwright's son, however, is likely to mess up the wheel a million times, and everyone hearing those words about clutches and accelerators either kills the motor or causes the vehicle to lurch. It's not that the words are wrong, it's just that they do not connect the learner appropriately with the activity. They may be necessary to begin with, but everyone who has ever finally mastered a standard transmission can tell you to do the action well, you must let go of your mind and stop thinking and just perform the action. The more you try to regulate the action by thinking about it, the clunkier it becomes. Finally, one enters into the zone, and there is a kind of selfless magic in the performance of the action. Here is the second skilled story from chapter 3 entitled The Key to Nourishing Life. It is found on pages 224 and 225 of the RCCP text. In my opinion, this is one of the greatest vignettes in all of the history of philosophy. I hope, if you take nothing else from this class, that you will remember this little passage for the rest of your lives. A butcher was cutting up an ox for Lord Wenhui. Wherever his hand touched, wherever his shoulder leaned, wherever his foot stepped, wherever his knee pushed, with a zip, with a whoosh, he handled his chopper with aplomb and never skipped a beat. He moved in time to the beat of the dance of the mulberry forest and harmonized with the head of the line symphony. Lord Wenhui said, "Ah, excellent. That technique can reach such heights." The butcher sheathed his chopper and responded, "What your servant values is the way, which goes beyond technique. When I first began cutting up oxen, I did not see anything but oxen. 3 years later, I couldn't see the whole ox. And now I encounter them with spirit and don't look with my eyes. Sensible knowledge stops, and spiritual desires proceed. I rely on the heavenly patterns, strike in the big gaps, am guided by the large fissures, and follow what is inherently so. I never touch a ligament or tendon, much less do I do any heavy wrenching. A good butcher changes his chopper every year because he chips it. An average butcher changes it every month because he breaks it. There are spaces between those joints, and the blade has no thickness. If you use what has no thickness to go where there is space, oh, there's plenty of extra room to play about in. That's why, after 19 years, the blade of my chopper is still as though fresh from the grindstone. Still, when I get to a hard place, I see the difficulty and take breathless care. My gaze settles, my movements slow. I moved the chopper slightly, and in a twinkling it's come apart, crumbling to the ground like a clod of earth. I stand holding my chopper and glance all around, dwelling on my accomplishment. Then I clean my chopper and put it away. Lord Wenhui said, "Excellent. I have heard the words of a butcher and have learned how to care for life." The idea here is that in nature there are natural or heavenly patterns in things. We learn of them by coming into contact with them in ox carcasses, wooden wheels, standard transmissions, standard basketball courts, musical instruments, etc. The butcher describes the interactions with these heavenly patterns as being spiritual. There is a sense in which, when one has become very good at something, the conscious, thinking mind is placed in the background. The trap of words is forgotten, and even the self is forgotten. Consider the butcher in light of this further passage from chapter 19, The Penetrating Life, found on page 248 of our RCCP text. Yanhui said to Kongzi, "I once crossed the depths of Goblet Gulf. The ferryman handled the boat like a spiritual being. I asked him, 'Can a person learn to handle a boat like that?' He said, 'A good swimmer can master the ability, and a diver can handle it easily even if he's never seen a boat before.' I asked him for more, but he wouldn't tell me. May I ask you what he meant?" Kongzi said, "A good swimmer can master it because he forgets the water. A diver can handle it easily without ever having seen a boat before because he views the depths like a hillside and a flipped boat like a slipping cart. The 10,000 things could flip and slip in front of him, and they wouldn't get in his front door. Where could he go wrong and not be at ease?" Of course, we learn from the first chapter of the Tao Te Ching that it is the naming that is the mother of the 10,000 things. This includes the water, the boat, and the self. Zhuangzi had spent most of the chapter, Autumn Floods, in sections not in our text, arguing for Huizi's position that these naming categories are artificial. That is why he could so strenuously take on Huizi himself on the issue of knowing the fish. There is one more vignette to think about before we close. This one has come to be regarded as Zhuangzi's conversion story. It is found in chapter 20, The Mountain Tree, which is on pages 248 and 249 of the RCCP text. Zhuangzi was wandering by the edge of the Diaoling Preserve when he saw a strange magpie flying up from the south. Her wings were 7 feet across and her eyes were an inch around. She bumped into his forehead and then crashed into a chestnut grove. He said, "What kind of a bird is this with such magnificent wings that don't get it anywhere, and such big eyes that cannot see?" Hitching up his robes and tiptoeing forward, he pursued it, bow in hand. He saw a cicada forgetting itself in a pretty bit of shade. A praying mantis took advantage of the cover to grab it, forgetting its own body at the sight of game. The strange magpie was right behind, eyeing the prize and forgetting its own truth. Zhuangzi shuddered. "Eee! Things certainly entangle each other, each one dragging in the next." He threw down his bow and ran back the way he had come. But then the warden of the grove saw and pursued him, cursing. Zhuangzi went home and didn't come out for 3 days. His attendant Straw asked, "Sir, why haven't you left the house recently?" Zhuangzi said, I was guarding my body but forgot myself. I looked at muddy water and mistook it for clear depths. I've heard my teacher say, out in the world, follow its rules. Now, I was wandering in Diaoling and forgot myself. A strange magpie bumped my forehead, wandered into the chestnut grove, and forgot its truth. And the grove warden took me for a poacher. That's why I haven't been out. Like many others in the Zhuangzi, this is a strange story. It makes sense. It makes this one. What makes this one particularly striking, though, is that it has been interpreted as an experience that caused Zhuangzi to alter his own life. What is it that was so poignant in this event that it made Zhuangzi alter his life? There are many interpretations, including one in the Van Norden introduction. Here, though, is a possibility. One thing is that the event made Zhuangzi come to an understanding of a teaching that he had received from his teacher. Out in the world, follow its rules. He repeats in the passage over and over again that the main characters in the story had all, except the grove keeper, forgotten something. What the forgotten thing or things is varies by translation because Zhuangzi has been ambiguous. He uses two characters, highlighted here in yellow, that mean body, but one of them also comes to mean self. So he says, and there you can see it in Chinese, what he says, which means on the face of it, I was protecting my body and forgot my body. This doesn't seem to make sense. It does, however, make sense if the second usage of body really takes on its adjunct meaning of self. This reading commits Zhuangzi to what would appear to be a metaphysical view about the self. That is, it is something other than the body. I think that that is right, that the self is distinct from the body. But this is not a metaphysical distinction. It is more in keeping with Locke's notion that the self is a forensic term, or in other words, a concept that is based on words. And remember that words are of man. They are harnesses rather than being like four legs. It would seem then that this is the very thing that needs to be forgotten when engaged in skilled activities that reveal the heavenly patterns. Yet, what is equally clear from the event is that the forgetting of oneself is dangerous business. Doing so puts one's body in jeopardy, and it is natural to seek to protect one's body. I think this is enough to give us insight into the teacher's utterance. One cannot be about in society forgetting oneself. This must be done under protective conditions. The interpretation we get from Van Norden is, I believe, right. There is a futility in trying to escape the world. Zhuangzi, then, while wandering and seeking after the Tao, is not a recluse scholar. Zhuangzi seeks to escape the world from within the world itself, and this makes his form of Taoism somewhat different from the previous forms that we have seen in the recluses and in Lao Tzu. Feng Yulan characterizes Zhuangzi as providing the third phase of Taoism, and that brings us to a close.